according to a recent study, Republican voter fraud conspiracy theories might have actually done more harm to the GOP than good. And now we're specifically talking about the Georgia election, special election runoff. So now, new research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences provides some evidence that voters in Georgia who embraced Donald Trump's claims of widespread election fraud were less likely to cast their ballot in a pivotal runoff election. Wow, surprising, but not really. Gee, wasn't it me and, well, a lot of people, to be fair, tons of people were saying, hey, if you keep talking about how the elections are rigged, the voting process is rigged, and your vote's never going to count, it's not going to matter, that's going to make people not want to vote because they think, what's the point? Yeah. And it turns out that some people didn't vote for that same reason, or allegedly. Again, there's a little bit of nuance here, but we'll get to more of the information. So now, following the 2020 election, of course, as you know, we all know Donald Trump cried endlessly about voter fraud. The voter fraud is the fraud. The election was stolen from me. The 2,000 mules, the drop boxes, you got illegals that are voting. Now, all of that was debunked by people who ran elections, study elections, know elections, who have analyzed these elections, even judges that were appointed by Donald Trump himself, confirmed by Republicans in the Senate, these judges, and they're like, yeah, no, we don't have any evidence. We don't see any evidence of this. And now, but of course, a lot of the right thumbs their nose at knowledge, thumbs their nose at facts and so-called experts, and instead embrace nonsense conspiracy theories like the 2,000 mules, right? Now, it turns out that that may have, again, made losing that election a self-fulfilling prophecy. Study author John Green, a senior research scientist in the Networks Science Institute at Northeastern University, and a fellow at the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard, wrote this. Trends in U.S. politics are such that Democratic and Republican politicians are both vocally suspicious of their opponents' respect for the rules of the game in our democracy. To be fair, these suspicions come with very different levels of empirical support. These conspiracy theories about widespread voter fraud on the part of Democrats really are baseless. So, look, what they're saying, they're putting it in a super nice way that, yeah, both sides are like, hey, I don't think the other side's playing fair. And you can definitely point at Republicans and make a really, really strong case, right? But they also point out that, yeah, the things that Republicans are saying, the Democrats are doing, completely and utterly baseless. There's just absolutely no evidence of that. Shutting it down, and again, the most polite way possible. Now, gerrymandering, for example, just to go through the ways that Democrats are correct in their rhetoric that Republicans do want to, restrict who votes. Gerrymandering is real, and by the way, that is used on both sides. Voter suppression in the form of closing polling places, that's real. Voter purges that are just random and not based on things like, okay, so the voter purges, there's a system, interstate cross-check, that basically takes names that are similar and rejects them, even if it's not the same person. And so those people get, deregistered, tossed out, purged from the voter rolls. When they go to vote, they find out that they're no longer registered and actually can't cast a ballot. Greg Palast has done a lot of work on that. And so that's an example of, voter suppression, right? That's real. Now, this guy might be arguing that you could, okay, you just look at the rhetoric, right? You look at the rhetoric from the left, about, these issues, voter suppression, etc. And yeah, you'll find some empirical data, right? You'll find it's more backed up by evidence. But when you look at the right wing, they're not backed up at all by evidence. That said, is it just Republicans that do voter suppression? Not entirely. Not entirely. But understand this in a little bit of a different way. And so I'm not even sure what the correct term is for what I'm about to explain. But we all remember the DNC primaries. Okay? Now, I'm a firm believer that the Democratic Party absolutely tried to undermine Bernie Sanders' campaign. Of course. Of course. Did they do so by fraud or illegal means? No. I don't believe that at all. So, I remember there's a lot of people on the left that were like, they rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders. Well, what do you mean by rig, right? If you mean they put their thumb in the scale for Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden in 2020, then absolutely. Yes, they put their thumb in the scale. Is that illegal? No. So now, did Sanders have a significant disadvantage in media coverage? Absolutely. That was one of the ways that they did absolutely put their thumb on the scale for the establishment candidate. Was there evidence of media collusion? Absolutely. Remember Donna Brazile giving debate questions to Bernie Sanders, sharing them before the debate. To Clinton and not Bernie Sanders before debate. Now, I'm not saying that debate question is determinative, but it just shows how it's still wrong, and there was bias and there was favor. What was far more determinative, though, is mainstream media, by and large, treating the Bernie Sanders campaign incredibly negatively, having an incredible bias against him. Studies from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, for example, showed the Washington Post was the most egregious offender of that, putting out negative articles about Sanders just on a consistent basis. Everybody remembers this, right? And let me get to that. This is the 15 of the 16 negative articles written about Bernie Sanders in a 16-hour time period. I look at all those. Yeah, that's a lot of negativity in one day. Now, Fair also found the Post's fact-checking team had consistently misinterpreted Sanders' statements to award him multiple Pinocchios. Claimed that he was lying. And even posted a headline, Bernie Sanders keeps saying his average donation is $27, but his own numbers contradict that, meaning that Bernie Sanders is a dirty liar. You know what his average donation is? $27.89. That's it. Yeah. $27.89. So, they could look at, technically he's lying about it being $27. Yeah, it's $27.89. Ridiculous. Now, I use this example because it really does show how there's evidence that Democrats have absolutely used ways to try to discourage progressives from voting for particular candidates in primaries. I remember talking about New York City's registration deadlines, how you had to register a year out from a primary to be involved. And there's numerous other examples of establishment Democrats trying to shut down the more progressive wing of the party. So those things are absolutely real. That said, the Democrats, while they do this in their own primaries, which are private, do they do this in general elections? No. But Republicans, they do absolutely do voter suppression. So, look, in fact, a lot of the people, okay, so a lot of the people that voted for Bernie Sanders, and let me just note this, they've been blamed. We've been blamed for not showing up in general elections, right? Even though most of us did. 88% of Sanders' primary voters in 2016 voted for Hillary Clinton. 12% of them went for Trump. Now, you might think, oh my God, 12% of Bernie Sanders supporters went for Trump? Yeah, well, when Hillary Clinton lost the primary to Barack Obama, 24% of her supporters went for John McCain on the Puma platform. What's the Puma platform? Party unity, my ass. Remember that. By the way, fun fact, the Washington Post went back during that time period, and what kind of attacks did they lob against voters for Obama? The same kind of attacks. Oh, they're sexist Obama boys. It's the same playbook they used during the 2016 election to smear their opponents, supporters of their opponents, as terrible people, as sexists, as misogynists. You get the picture. So, that said, I think that does matter. Back to the study, though. Green notes that there are debates within the parties about whether this kind of rhetoric, the rhetoric of, oh, it's not going to matter, it's rigged, everything's against you, etc., is counterproductive. Quote, people who work in Democratic politics, for instance, are sometimes worried that Democrats' allegations that Republicans are engaging in voter suppression could discourage potential Democratic voters from voting on the margins because it could create the impression that voting will be more difficult or inconvenient. But that's the thing, it is difficult and more convenient. It's not an argument they're making. It is. If you look at some of these lines in heavily minority areas, in these polling places, people waiting for 6 to 8 hours in order to cast their ballot, yeah, that is a problem. That is a huge problem. That is difficult and inconvenient. But when it comes to Republicans and their wacky conspiracies, apparently you're seeing the same thing. During the Georgia runoffs, we saw local Republican activists raising similar concerns about fraud allegations, that they were discouraging Republican voters from turning out because they were introducing uncertainty into whether voting was going to have any relationship with the runoff's outcome. So the question of whether there is any behavioral implications of this kind of elite rhetoric was what sparked my initial interest in the specific research question. That question, of course, was answered partly by the fact that they had analyzed Twitter data and voter records to explore the link between the endorsement of Trump's election fraud claims and voter turnout in Georgia's 2021 runoff elections. That sample included 45,431 Twitter users who had a voter record in the state of Georgia. The study authors evaluated whether Twitter users had liked or retweeted content supporting or detracting from election fraud conspiracy theories. They also evaluated whether the users had liked or retweeted posts by the official Twitter account of then President Donald Trump, and whether they had engaged with other prominent accounts that posted content supporting or opposing election fraud conspiracies. Green and his colleagues found that online engagement with content detracting from election fraud conspiracy theories was associated with higher turnout than expected in the runoff election. On the other hand, those who liked or shared tweets supporting fraud-related conspiracy theories were slightly less likely to vote. Now, again, there's a caveat to this. Obviously, there's some issues with the methodology, and they explain that. In fact, Green writes, we can't say for sure whether the big lie cost Republicans control of the Senate, but our study provides some evidence that it didn't help their candidates in the Georgia runoffs. All of our findings surprised us in the sense that there was good reasons to expect different results, and we really weren't sure what we'd find until we analyzed the data. The researcher proposed several other different mechanisms by which widespread claims of election fraud could affect turnout. They had theorized, for instance, that engagement with the 2020 election conspiracy theories on Twitter could possibly help boost Republican voter turnout due to their potential to elicit anger and strengthen partisan ties. Now, anger, of course, is a big driver of algorithms and a huge part of conservative politics. There are two things that conservatives feel very greatly, and that is disgust, which is number one, anger, which is what, again, a lot of right-wingers use to galvanize their base. That's why you always hear about a new, for example, something that transgender people did somehow, or, immigrant caravan, here comes the migrants, fear, they're dirty migrants, oh, it's the disgust and the fear. So that's what they'd use. Green explained that it was reasonable to expect that endorsing election conspiracy theories would have been associated with higher turnout in the runoffs because the conspiracy theory made people angry, and prior work has linked anger to things like party loyalty and intentions to vote. So if he had observed that positive relationship, it would have made sense. However, translating anger into action typically requires it to be paired with efficacy, a belief that you can do something to address the threat you perceive. Here, a central premise of the conspiracy theory that election results in Georgia are not directly based on the votes that citizens cast likely reduces efficacy, so the results we found also make sense. Another proposed mechanism was negative evaluations of co-partisan candidates, basically rhinos. Republicans, right-wingers like Marjorie Greene and Eric Greitens or Cretans, whatever, they constantly talk about hunting the rhinos. We got to go after the rhino Republicans in our party, and Donald Trump too. We got to go after the people who are not conservative enough, not Republican enough. And so, look, does that filter down? Absolutely. And so you could definitely make a case, as Green is, that yeah, maybe some of these voters just did not see their candidates as conservative enough, as pro-Trump enough. They're rhinos. So now he said, it's also possible the way the Republican candidates campaign turned these voters off. This election determined control of the Senate when Democrats had already won control of the House and presidency. If you're a Republican running for Senate in that situation, you typically want to appeal to the small but non-trivial slice of the electorate that sincerely prefers divided government. You want to pitch yourself as the last check against a Democratic trifecta. But if you say that this is a Republican candidate in the Georgia runoffs, you are implicitly acknowledging that Joe Biden is going to be the president. That is, you're behaving as if the election was not stolen. If you're really invested in the idea that the election was stolen and we need to do everything in our power to correct this obvious injustice, then why bother turning out to vote for a candidate like that? Again, we don't know if that's what drove our finding. We just can't rule it out. Fascinating. It kind of really shows how human activity is really unpredictable. And no matter how much you try to quantify it or chart it out, you just never really know until it happens. But that said, this report is in line with some of the others where, talked about how Republicans, some of them, decided to boycott elections because what's the point? Why does it matter? It's stolen by the Democrats anyway. Green says, we can't nail down why we see the relationships we see, and we can't completely rule out that the turnout behavior is being driven by something other than conspiracy theory. I mean, maybe people were tired of COVID, that Donald Trump had messed up. Or it could be just the fact that a lot of Republicans died as a result of COVID because they chose not to mask. They chose not to get vaccines. They chose to be completely unsafe, to go out to Applebee's, and demand for the lockdowns to be ended. Another factor that could explain this is less Republicans around now. But I do think the voter fraud claims are a huge part of this. He added, finally, I think it's really important to keep in mind that conspiracy theories undermining faith in elections outcomes are bad, regardless of any relationships they might have had with voting behavior in the short term. Well, I can't really disagree. So I guess Republicans, if you want to keep talking about how the elections are rigged and then not turn out, who might argue?